It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. The former boss of the Post Office hands back her CBE over the Horizon IT scandal. Sky News understands the Prime Minister is preparing to make a statement tomorrow. We get reaction from one person who was convicted and sent to jail. As it's revealed, 130 more potential victims have come forward.
The stress will eat you up, which was eating you up slowly but silently. It's like a silent killer.
Also tonight, the Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says he's concerned Israel may have broken international law as pressure grows on Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Armed men burst into a television station after the president of Ecuador announces a state of emergency over the escape of a gang leader. 2023 is confirmed officially as the hottest year on record, with temperatures expected to exceed 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels by February, and 2024 is to be hotter still. Donald Trump appears in court arguing for immunity from prosecution over charges of election fraud.
There was black mould down the side here that you can't really see.
And it's going all the way up the wall?
All the way up, yeah.
And tough new rules for landlords to deal with dangerous damp in properties after the death of a toddler. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30. Hello, good evening. For those wrongly convicted, today could be a sign that finally their calls for accountability are being listened to. It was confirmed that the former Post Office Chief Executive, Paula Venables, will hand back her CBE with immediate effect. Faulty Horizon software, which made it look like money was missing from post office stores, led to hundreds of convictions. And now a lawyer working on the case has told Sky News that 130 new potential victims of the post office scandal have come forward since the ITV drama Mr Bates versus the Post Office first aired. Sky's national correspondent Tom Parmenter has been speaking to one of those people convicted and has this report.
This is your folder.
Yes, it is.
While Rabina and hundreds like her had their lives ruined, the boss of the post office was honoured. But Paula Venables, the chief executive who presided over a scandal at the post office, is handing her CBE back.
It's just a gesture, nothing else. Oh well, her time's coming now. She's going to pay for it.
In her statement, Paula Venables said, "I am truly sorry for the devastation caused to the sub-postmasters and their families, whose lives were torn apart by being wrongly accused and wrongly prosecuted as a result of the Horizon system." Rabina was sent to prison for 12 months for false accounting. The trauma still haunts her.
I couldn't think straight. That night, when they took me down, next morning I got up and I was sitting at the edge of my bed, and one of the inmates came across and said to me, "Don't worry about it, it'll get easier."
Did it?
It didn't, no. But every day you're on your own. Who do you talk to? You're tired, you're locked up most of the time. You're trying to not think about it too much because the stress will eat you up, which was eating you up slowly but silently. It's like a silent killer.
The post office prosecuted over 700 of its own people and protected the institution at all costs.
They say money's somehow gone missing from this branch, which it hasn't, and I have to pay it back.
The TV drama that has crystallised the injustice has angered the nation. 93 victims did have their convictions quashed, but hundreds more are still waiting. The pressure to act is now building every day.
The Prime Minister's spokesperson has admitted that victims across the country have been treated appallingly and confirmed that the UK government will announce this week how they will move faster to put right what they can.
Urgent meetings have been taking place between ministers and the judiciary.
We can do something good, Mr Speaker, together, if the Justice Secretary would bring a simple bill to quash all 800 immediately.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman who, with his customary precision, puts his finger on this appalling injustice. The suggestions he made is receiving active consideration. I expect to be able to make further announcements shortly.
The police are also re-examining what happened. Next week, the focus of the long-running public inquiry will fall on the tech firm Fujitsu, which installed the Horizon computer system.
There's no doubt about it. It was a faulty bit of software. People have been convicted wrongly on the basis of those faults, saying that it was totally invincible. So I suspect they will get their comeuppance, but let's wait until the right time for that.
The inquiry into this scandal has yet another year to run, but the clamour for justice will not wait. The victims of the post office have suffered for long enough. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
And Tom joins me now. Yes, that clamour continues, doesn't it? A potential announcement tomorrow then as we await next steps.
Yes, this, Shrewsbury, is the Midlands town where Rabina, who we heard from in that report, worked. It's where she was prosecuted, hounded out of the job that she loved, and ultimately where she was sentenced to time in prison. And there are victims up and down this country who are waiting to hear what the government has to say in this new swell of anticipation of a breakthrough on behalf of those victims. Whenever the Prime Minister says it, it could come as soon as tomorrow lunchtime. They will be watching because they are fed up of being let down. We know that there are up to 130 potential new victims who have come forward just in the past week since the TV drama aired. We know that there are widespread calls for those outstanding convictions to be quashed. Many would like to see the Post Office stripped of its powers to prosecute people. And there are also calls for Fujitsu to be banned from winning any more high-value public sector contracts. So the victims of this scandal will be watching and waiting to see what the Prime Minister has to say. They will be scrutinising that in great detail. And of course, we know that it will come too late for over 60 sub-postmasters who have died in this long, bitter struggle that has gone on for 2 decades. They are no longer with us. So whatever the Prime Minister has to say this week, whatever promises he makes for them and their families, it will be too late.
Tom, thank you. The Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron faced MPs today for the first time since taking his new role. He was questioned about the Israel-Hamas war and said he was concerned that Israel's attack on Gaza may have broken international law. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel on a diplomatic tour and used a speech today to say that the daily death toll in Gaza is too high. Sky's Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports now from Tel Aviv.
Even if they can escape the Israeli airstrikes, the scramble for basic food is now an everyday fight to stay alive in Gaza. A bowl of plain rice in a pan or a plastic tub, whatever they can get their hands on, is the only thing that many people in Gaza will eat today.
I eat food off the floor, anything that's edible. I pick up and eat. I don't care what it is.
This food isn't even being provided by the UN or any aid agencies, with Palestinians helping each other because simply not enough aid is being allowed in.
Those who can help the people in need should do so. The suffering here is real. We used to hear about things like this before, but now it's real. We're living it now.
In Tel Aviv, 60 miles up the coast from the Gaza Strip, the US Secretary of State met with Israel's leaders.
Nice to see you.
Antony Blinken reiterated America's support for Israel's continuing war, but said that more must be done to get aid into Gaza.
More food, more water, more medicine, other essential goods need to get into Gaza, and then once they're in Gaza, they need to get more effectively to the people who need them. The daily toll on civilians in Gaza, particularly on children, is far too high.
Outside his hotel as he met the Israeli president, families of people still held hostage inside Gaza demanded that more must be done to return them home. That message was echoed to us in Tel Aviv's hostage plaza.
I keep myself going by saying we've reached the bottom, and the only thing we can do now is talk about the need for some kind of peace agreement that will pull us out of this basic, terrible problem we have, the Palestinians. We need to reach some kind of settlement.
International pressure on Israel is growing, even amongst the most steadfast allies. The British Foreign Secretary told MPs he is concerned that war crimes have been committed in Gaza.
Am I worried that Israel has taken action that might be in breach of international law because this particular premises has been bombed or whatever? Yes, of course I'm worried about that.
Israel's forces say that they're lowering the tempo of fighting in northern Gaza, but this is what they're leaving behind: an uninhabitable wasteland. Israel has agreed to allow the UN into the north to inspect it for themselves, but we don't know when that might happen, and Gazans won't be able to return home until it has. Alistair Bungle, Sky News in Tel Aviv.
Well, our Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates joins me now from the Foreign Office. So do Lord Cameron's words today, Sam, signify a shift in British policy?
Well, the Foreign Office insists that they don't. But, Anna, I think that this is a really quite significant moment. Look, you had to look quite closely at what David Cameron was saying in that Select Committee hearing to understand what's going on here. David Cameron, as you just heard, said that he was worried that Israel might have committed war crimes. Now, he also said that Foreign Office lawyers, and I think this is the important bit, also worried that Israel might have committed war crimes and went back to do further investigations and have been talking to Israel about exactly what's going on. And we didn't hear the sort of final assessment of what Foreign Office lawyers said. But David Cameron also said that he hadn't been told that Israel did breach international law. Now, I think here on that point, we might be somewhat dancing on the head of a pin, because I don't think the Foreign Office lawyers in the building behind me would ever say definitively that another country was definitely in breach of international law. That's a decision to be made by the courts. They almost certainly would have hedged it. So I'm not sure David Cameron was telling anything that we didn't know by saying he hadn't been definitively told. But the fact that this happened and the fact that he said it, I think, is incredibly significant because it goes further than what we've had before. And it comes at a really important moment. You've got the international diplomacy with the US Secretary of State in the Middle East trying to calm down tensions. You do have concerns in the building behind me in the Foreign Office about the kinds of things that are coming out of the mouths of Israeli ministers in the last week and a half about the need to clear out Gaza of Palestinians in order to get some kind of settlement. This idea that actually the Israeli government is saying one thing to the international community through the media, that the conflict is starting to come to an end, and another thing to its domestic population. So this is a moment of big tension, and so these words matter. Whether or not David Cameron was shooting from the hip or not, what he said today will resonate at home and in the Middle East.
Sam, live for us there in Westminster. Thank you. Armed protesters have stormed one of Ecuador's main television stations hours after the country's president declared a state of emergency. Restrictions were imposed after a notorious gang leader escaped from jail. Well, Sky's Martha Kellner is following this story. And armed with guns and seemingly explosives, Martha, a dramatic incident. What's the latest?
Really dramatic and scary for both the staff members working at that television station and, of course, the audience watching at home. This was a public television station and a TC network. It's headquartered in the city of Guayaquil. People in the UK may have heard of that city. It's a gateway for the Pacific beaches in Ecuador and also the Galapagos Islands. These are the pictures that you see here. A group of individuals, many of them wearing balaclavas, almost all dressed in black, burst into this station. You can see the man who appears to be the presenter there with a large rifle to his neck. He appears to be making a plea to another individual. Many of these people have guns, large rifles. Some even appear to be holding improvised explosive devices, or at least mock versions of them. You can see in the background of some of these pictures staff who have been ordered to sit on the floor or lay down on the floor. This horrifying incident lasts about half an hour before the gunmen appeared to leave. It was then another half an hour, we're told, before the police arrived. They have, Ecuadorian police say, all now been arrested. But this is not an isolated incident. There have been a series of attacks in Ecuador over the past 24 hours. And it's all linked to this man, Ecuadorian police believe. He is known as Fito. He's the gang lord of a notorious gang in Ecuador. They're believed to be behind a number of violent uprisings in prisons in recent months. He's been defying authorities at every turn. He even made a music video from inside his prison cell. He disappeared from his police cell on Sunday. That led to the president of Ecuador then issuing a state of emergency. But there are a number of other reports, unconfirmed, of violence erupting around the country. So clearly a very uncertain situation in Ecuador, a very scary situation, and a battle for the president of Ecuador to bring under control. He has only been in his post for a matter of months now. So a developing situation in Ecuador at the moment.
Martha, thank you. Climate scientists have issued a warning today after it was confirmed that 2023 was officially the hottest day on record. Copernicus, the United Nations climate group, found that last year was on average 1.48 degrees warmer than levels before industrial times, when humans began burning fossil fuels at scale. But what does it mean for the planet and how we live on it? Sky Science and Technology editor Tom Clark reports.
So 2023 was officially the warmest year on record, but it's how warm that makes it truly significant. Take a look at temperatures decade to decade, a subtle warming trend becoming abundantly clear by the 1990s, continuing through this decade. But look at 2023, the second half, head and shoulders above any previous year. Not that the entire year wasn't really warm compared to what's called the pre-industrial average, before greenhouse gases really started to accumulate in the atmosphere. The average of all temperatures across the globe on each day in 2023 was at least a degree warmer than in Victorian times. Half, well, 1.5 degrees warmer, and a couple over in November, a full 2 degrees above industrial. The first time global averages crossed that threshold. Why? Well, it's almost entirely due to the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. But the temperatures in the latter half of 2023 also got a boost from the natural El Niño cycle. You can see it here. Warm water welling up off the coast of South America, adding extra heat to the system. But it's not all El Niño. We had crazy ocean heat waves in the North Atlantic and Mediterranean. And that's not to ignore the coldest place on Earth. Sea ice concentration in the Antarctic, here in white and blue, fell to record lows too compared to the 30-year average, shown here by the purple dotted line. 2023, with heat waves, wildfires and floods, took us temporarily into the territory of 1.5 degrees of warming, the limit defined by the Paris Agreement. It's a preview of what we'll see when temperatures permanently breach that limit and exceed it if we don't act fast.
You really have to stop burning fossil fuels, and quickly, because already a 1.5 or even a 1.5 degree world is difficult for our societies to deal with. And we're not on track for 1.5 degrees. The policies currently in place get us somewhere closer, much closer to 3 degrees. And that is not something that this world and our societies are constructed to be able to withstand.
Even if we doubled our efforts to cut emissions starting tomorrow, we'd still overshoot 1.5 degrees of warming. But it's still possible to reduce them enough to avoid exceeding that threshold permanently and then even reverse the trend. But it's going to take a serious shift in attitude.
Tom Clark there. Now, Donald Trump has been in court in Washington trying to block one of his criminal trials. He faces charges that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election, but his lawyers argue he should be immune from prosecution because he was president at the time. Mr. Trump, who is hoping to be the Republican candidate and run again for the White House this year, said he was confident the case would be dismissed. Our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
It's a spectacle once rare, now routine. The cavalcade transfer of Donald Trump from campaign trail to court didn't draw the crowds like it used to. Even if America eyed this day in court as no less important. This was a Trump attempt to get off the hook. His lawyers told appeal judges he shouldn't be tried on election interference because he was president and should have immunity for actions whilst in office. An audio feed relayed the courtroom test of the argument, like this from Judge Florence Pan to Trump's lawyer, John Sawer.
I asked you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival who was not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution?
If he were impeached and convicted first. And
so your answer is no.
My answer is qualified yes.
Donald Trump didn't have to attend court for this hearing, but his legal troubles are good for his poll ratings. In election year, court is where prosecution and politics intersect.
This is the way they're going to try and win, and that's not the way it goes. That'll be bedlam in the country. It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad precedent. As we said, it's the opening of a Pandora's box.
This is an appeal relating to a trial due to start on the 4th of March. Pending the white smoke, some minds are already made up.
Trump's lawyers were arguing that a sitting president can commit any crime, no matter how heinous, and he's criminally, immune. You can't prosecute him. And I don't think the judges went for that, will go for that.
If the appeal judges here find in favor of Donald Trump, and that's a big if, then clearly that's a victory for him. But even if they don't, this is a process that delivers a partial win, at least for the former president. Delay. One man played music outside court as they adjourned inside. Further delay from further appeals is what Donald Trump wants to hear. For him, rolling the circus beyond the November election is a political strategy. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Boeing has confirmed it's making updates to its safety inspection plans following advice from safety regulators. There's been a further significant fall in Boeing's share price after two US airlines, United and Alaska, said they'd found loose bolts on some of their Boeing 737 MAX 9 jets. US regulators grounded all MAX 9 planes after a door blew off an Alaska Airlines flight mid-air. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso reports.
What's that?
Depressurised, I think.
When a door panel blew off a Boeing 737 MAX 9 over Portland, this is how it looked from the cockpit.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Alaskan 1282, rapid depressurisation. Request descent altitude 10,000 feet.
We're in a 737 simulator at Semet Aviation in Hampshire. But Peter and Adam fly these for real. They've recreated the scene on board using a training programme, following the same procedures as the Alaskan Air pilots.
Set 1013, cross-check. You just click into training mode, something that we've practiced many, many times before in the simulator. So you just go, oh, done this before, let's do it again, and you immediately slip into it almost like a team.
You fly these aircraft. How safe are they?
I mean, it's an incredibly safe aircraft. It's one of the most popular selling airplanes of all time, and millions of flight hours every year. So it's incredibly safe. Instances like this are really, really rare, and I'm sure they'll be investigated quite thoroughly afterwards to stop it from happening again.
Passengers may not have been as calm as the panel known as a door plug disappeared. The focus now is on how it happened. The left rear door plug blew off shortly after takeoff from Portland. Engineers from the US National Transportation Safety Board say the plug slid off its hinges. It's held in place by 12 fittings, and 4 bolts should prevent it from sliding up and off. The bolts haven't been recovered. Engineers say further analysis is needed to understand what happened. With its global fleet of 9 Maxes grounded, Boeing is under pressure to reassure investors as well as passengers.
It will be an issue for them, and clearly it is a concern. So they'll be working hard to find out what is at the root of this problem.
Boeing says it is in touch with inspectors and is committed to the highest safety standards. But with major customer Ryanair calling for improved quality control, there is turbulence ahead. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
Tonight, MPs have been debating a call for the release of documents relating to the government's Rwanda policy. The controversial bill will return to the Commons next week, with rebels from the Conservative Party threatening to vote against it. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, joins me now. So are the rebels sharpening their knives again then, John?
Well, publication of a set of amendments tabled by those Tory right-wingers who threatened to vote against the Rwanda bill back in December, but in the end ended up abstaining, ensuring the Prime Minister had a majority of 43. They are poised to reveal the details of their amendments that they're going to put down for debate next Tuesday and Wednesday. Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the Commons, today announced that's when the bill's coming back. She said she was announcing the dates before her usual Thursday business statement to give the MPs more time to put them down. What she really meant, of course, was to give the government more time to decide how to respond. Now, essentially what these amendments will propose are, first of all, that the courts the ministers should be able to ignore so-called pyjama injunctions given out by judges in Strasbourg in the middle of the night, which has happened to block flights previously. Illegal migrants shouldn't be able to take individual cases to court to stop their flight to Rwanda, and also that courts shouldn't be able to rely on international treaties, on the European Convention of Human Rights, or indeed the UK's Human Rights Act passed by Tony Blair's government. Now, the Prime Minister has to weigh up. Does he accept some of these amendments? Does he do a deal, or does he face them down? The opposition parties aren't going to back these amendments, so really the Prime Minister has to decide whether he's going to have a fight with these rebels or back down and agree to some of these amendments.
John, in Westminster, thank you. Now, when 2-year-old Awab Ishak was killed by a respiratory condition caused by exposure to mould in his family's housing association flat, it shone a light on the state of some homes in the UK. Today, his family backed new measures proposed by the government to be known as Awab's Law to protect social tenants. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi has more.
There was black mould down the side here that you can't really see.
And it's going all the way up the wall?
All the way up, yeah.
Shelby's flat is a health hazard. Mould and damp on practically every wall and surface. So you were breathing in all of this mould?
Yeah, and I've never been as poorly since I moved in there.
The rot spread through all her furniture, carpets and clothes, destroying everything.
Do rabbits makeup?
But she's more worried about the effect it has had on her and her one-year-old daughter's health.
My little girl, she didn't stay with me for like 4 days because she was really poorly with it. I ended up in hospital on steroids, antibiotics and a steroids inhaler because of how bad the mould had affected my chest. I thought it was going to be, yeah, this one. I thought it was going to be a good fresh start, but no, if anything, it's just been hell.
Shelby's home is managed by Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, RBH, who told Sky News, "We are sorry that Miss Atherton has experienced these issues with her home, and we reiterate our apology to her. We are working hard to carry out the repairs needed as quickly as possible. Our number one priority is to safeguard the health and well-being of our customers." The same housing association managed the home where Awab Ishak lived. The 2-year-old died after suffering from a respiratory condition caused by prolonged exposure to mould. The government has proposed new legal requirements that could see landlords taken to court if they fail to investigate tenant concerns within a fortnight. They'll be forced to start fixing within a week and make emergency repairs within a day. In response, the Housing Association said this was a tragic case that resulted from failings at RBH, and we are very clear it should never have happened. We remain committed to our promise to learn from what went wrong and put things right. We fully support the implementation of Awab's Law. Shelby and Layla Ray will have to stay in this hotel until their home is fit to live in. She can only hope that her ordeal will then finally come to an end. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Rochdale.
Well, coming up next, we've got the press preview. Tonight, we're joined by the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Chief Leader Writer of The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you. Among the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Fujitsu won contracts under Sunak's watch, the paper says, despite the Post Office IT scandal. That and plenty more when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. The former Post Office boss, Paula Venables, has handed back her CBE as the government prepares to make new announcements on the Horizon scandal. The Foreign Secretary has said he is worried that Israel may have breached international law during its war with Hamas. And doctors have confirmed US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has prostate cancer. The White House has said President Biden was not told about his illness. Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill, and the Chief Leader Writer at The Observer, Sonia Soda. Welcome to both of you. So let's take a look, shall we, at the front pages, starting with the Metro, leading with the decision for former Post Office boss Paula Venables to hand back her CBE with the headline, "I've listened, I'm sorry," says Venables at last. The Financial Times is also leading on the Post Office scandal, reporting Fujitsu, the company behind the software, won contracts under Sunak's watch despite the Post Office IT scandal. While the Eye has an exclusive reporting IT firm Fujitsu was granted access to priority lanes to win £700 million worth of government contracts, despite concerns over its faulty Horizon software. And The Sun speaks to a postmaster who says he was backed by Princess Kate. While the Mirror speaks to a widow who says her husband was destroyed by the Post Office scandal. The Telegraph also covering the Post Office news, saying the developer of the Horizon system demanded immunity before agreeing to appear at the public inquiry. In the Daily Mail, calls from campaigners for the ex-Post Office boss to return millions in bonuses and pensions. Front of the Daily Star, it reports that Rishi Sunak will face a showdown with Tory rebels after they issued a series of demands to toughen up new Rwanda deportation laws. And, goodness me, the Star, can you wear your undies for more than one day in a row? That's if you're a bloke only. They only seem to talk about that. That's on the front page of the Star. So scan the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, where you can check out for yourselves the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Henry and to Sonia. Welcome to both of you. So Paula Venables leading the front pages, Henry, perhaps not surprisingly, with the Metro's headline, "At last," on her CBE.
Yeah, absolutely. So there has been mounting pressure ever since this really broke into the headlines a few days ago for Paula Venables, who was the leader of the Post Office during the cover-up period of the rearguard action, if you like, against the postmasters to return her CBE. And she's finally said that she is going to do it. And presumably, given that everyone from the Prime Minister downwards has backed this decision, that will eventually get ratified by the royal sort of committee or council that eventually signs off such things, because, of course, an individual can't get rid of their honours on their own. And that's a great start. But as the paper says, during her period as chief executive of the Post Office, she was paid a large amount of money in performance-related bonuses. And given that she's felt the need to hand back her honour, and given that her performance is now the subject of a national scandal, the question now is, should she have to pay that back as well? So, yes, the Metro is suggesting she left with £5 million and her CBE. I read £6 million elsewhere. I mean, will the pressure continue on her? Because there are other CEOs, aren't there? For example, Noel Thomas, who was featured in the TV drama, one of the first to be prosecuted, was prosecuted under Adam Crozier, who later became head of ITV, for whose drama it was.
There are certainly questions for Adam Crozier too, and also for the two chairs who chaired the Post Office during the time of this scandal. And I think there are questions for all of them. So it's important that we focus on Paula Venables, but not just Paula Venables, on other leaders. But I think the other thing that we really need to focus on as well, so first of all, there is the accountability for individuals. And I hope that the inquiry will be saying much more, not just on corporate responsibility in the Post Office and Fujitsu, but actually which individuals were held accountable. And I hope that if there is the evidence to support it, we will see criminal prosecution for any individuals for whom there's evidence that they might have perverted the Court of Justice, for example, or committed fraud themselves. I think that's really important. But as well as the accountability, there is also compensation and justice for the victims. And while if you're a victim, you might look at this and say, well, that's a start, as Henry.
Henry.
Oh my goodness, we have conversation all going on.
Could have just rolled with it.
I've once called Henry Harry by mistake, and no, I'm just paranoid about doing it. Anyway, but yes, so but we've got hundreds of sub-postmasters who still haven't had their convictions, their unsafe convictions overturned, and many who haven't even received the money they were forced to pay the post office, that they didn't owe the post office, tens of thousands of pounds, some of them. They've not even had that back, let alone any compensation. So we've really got to speed up the wheels of justice. It's not just about something that's important, symbolic, like a CBE.
Yeah, we needed to speed up the wheels of justice 10 years ago, but that's when the prosecutions were still
Absolutely.
happening, weren't they?
Yeah.
Bit of a double take. I thought it was back on the Daily Star story here. Jason Donovan. But anyway, now give back your millions. You know, once again, it's the idea of, like, why did you walk away with such a big payoff? So, in a sense, the pressure continues. But this is sort of easy pickings, isn't it? Focusing on one individual or two. Yesterday it was Sir Ed Davey. But actually, you know, the substantive issues of how it came to this, the doubling down of reputational protection, which we saw for so many years. I'm going to jump ahead, if you don't mind, to the Telegraph, which is the news about the person demanding immunity to appear. The IT expert who created the faulty software has twice had testimony to the inquiry delayed. And Sonia, you were saying that people should be prosecuted. Well, perhaps that's not surprising why he specifically is trying to demand immunity before giving evidence.
Yes, although this is a statutory inquiry, so I think that means that they can compel witnesses to give testimony. So I'm not surprised that the chair of the inquiry has said to this man, no, you can't have immunity. So Gareth Jenkins, he's the architect of Horizon. We don't know about his personal wrongdoing, but we do know that his evidence about Horizon was really critical in securing, in the Post Office private prosecutions, it was critical in securing these prosecutions. I'm sorry, but he's just not in a position to make these kinds of demands. You come to a statutory inquiry and you tell the truth under oath. And if you've committed a crime, or there's evidence that you may have committed a crime, yes, you can expect to see justice in the same way. You know, look at what happened to these sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses. So I think this demand, I will only tell you the truth if you give me immunity, it's a statutory inquiry that isn't going to wash.
Yes, so the Telegraph says his court testimony stating that the Fujitsu IT system worked correctly was central to convictions and was repeatedly used by Post Office lawyers. Tracked down by the Daily Telegraph to his home in Berkshire, Mr Jenkins said, when asked if he was sorry for what had happened, I don't want to talk, I don't have anything to say to you. So, you know, there is, again, a sense of both the Post Office and Fujitsu, the allegations of obfuscation against them being, in a sense, fair, as we wait for more on the inquiry. But anyway, let's go to the FT, Henry, which is Fujitsu still winning contracts despite the IT scandal, which has now been known about for a long time.
Yeah. So, I mean, government IT procurement is a byword for fiascos. I mean, government procurement in general is a byword for fiascos. But yeah, the problem is, as you say, that Fujitsu have not just delivered a faulty system, and there were rumours that it was a faulty system even before Horizon was rolled out. New Labour received warnings in 1999 that there were problems with this system. They started prosecuting sub-postmasters in 2000.
There was a pilot in 95, wasn't
there?
And the directors of the Post Office, as Horizon was being developed, noted concerns about the reliability of Horizon. That's in the minutes.
And so Fujitsu didn't only do that, but they also, as you say, they were participated in the ferocious effort by the Post Office to prosecute the postmasters and cover up the flaws in how they operated, which is corporate conduct. You know, it's one thing to ship a faulty product, that can happen, but you should then hold your hands up, collaborate with the authorities and the courts, and not send your chief engineer to mislead a judge about what it can do. And despite all of that, they are still winning, not just winning public contracts, they're being put in the priority lane to win public contracts worth hundreds of millions of pounds from all sorts of government departments. And the call on the front of the FT is, what the FT is reporting is that there is now a call for the Prime Minister to blacklist Fujitsu from receiving any new government contracts until the postmasters scandal has been sorted out.
Yeah, and the FT saying since the court's decision to overthrow many of the cases, Fujitsu has received £1.6 billion in individual government contracts and was involved in a further £3.3 billion in joint awards from departments including the Treasury and Revenue and Customs. The contracts covered a range of software services. We know the Environment Agency and their flood alert system as well, you know, as part of it. Is that simply because there's no other software people out there. I mean, I know they had to continue with the post office because there was no alternative, so they've had to give another. What was the money on that? It was anyway, further millions in order to prop up that until 2025.
Yeah, I think that is an issue, which is that some of these government contracts are so huge that what happens is you get governments issuing contracts to companies like Capita, like Serco, huge companies that have failed in the past. Because these contracts are so big, there literally there aren't any other sort of, there's a small number of these very huge companies that go for these billion-pound government contracts or multi-million-pound contracts. There isn't anyone else out there to bid for them. And this is a really extraordinary example, I think, although it's common across public sector procurement. But I think this is one of the worst examples of companies being rewarded for failure, completely failing upwardly. It's insane.
But also, the one thing to remember about public procurement is that the government's really big, and it's people are signing individual contracts, right? So if you're in the Department for the Environment and you're trying to put together a flood system, you're not necessarily aware of what's going on with the postmaster's scandal day to day. You're a procurement officer, in a completely different department, and so you go to Fujitsu because Fujitsu is one of the big providers, right? So you need better coordination in government if you want to actually make something like this blacklist work. Is you need to have some much more central grip on who's an acceptable contractor.
You blacklist it till there's no one on it, don't you? I found my paragraph I was looking for. Horizon is estimated to have cost nearly £2.4 billion to install and manage since 1999. The Post Office awarded Fujitsu £36 million more last year to keep Horizon in operation until at least 2025. I knew I'd read it somewhere. Anyway, the other issue, of course, is what we expect to hear from the government, how they're going to speed through the appeals process, which has all been part of debate, whether we're going to hear something from Rishi Sunak at Prime Minister's Questions tomorrow, which is what we were hearing. But there is sort of an expediting happen, isn't there, Henry, now, to try and get an urgency to get something done quickly for people?
There is. So we don't know exactly what, but Kevin Hollinrake, who now holds the Post Office brief, has said that there will be potentially emergency legislation that will bring this forward, to deal specifically with this issue. That's not the same thing as
the Fujitsu appeals, effectively.
Yes, effectively, the postmasters. It's not the same thing as a systemic fix that will stop this happening again, but it is the fastest way to make sure that you sort of slice through the bureaucracy and get justice for postmasters. I don't know, Rishi Sunak will say something. Prime Minister's Questions will touch on this. It's the biggest story of the week, but we will have to wait for the government to announce what their legislation actually is. Yeah, OK. In the meantime, Rwanda, back in the Commons this evening, back properly next week, and the Tory rebels have fired their warning shots, as the Daily Express already puts it, Sonia.
Yes, that's right. So it's kind of back to school for MPs, as you just said. This was one of the huge issues in the run-up to Christmas. It's going to continue to be a big fight within the government in the coming weeks, I think. Rishi Sunak's got this problem, which is we much discussed at the end of last year, which is that he's trying to keep all wings of his party happy on this. He's got some MPs who want him to go further than the face of the legislation, and he's got some MPs who think it goes too far with respect to international law. That's quite separate from the substantive debate around whether this plan is a good idea, whether it's workable. I suspect we might disagree on that. I think it's a terrible plan. I think it's immoral and unworkable. But there is this issue around the politics and whether he can get it through his party, and that's what we're returning to that debate this week.
Well, we've had some of the details of the amendments being filed by, the list is here, Ian Duncan-Smith, Suella Braverman, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates, Sir Simon Clarke, Sir Jake Berry, Sir John Hayes, Sir John Redwood and Mark Francois. It includes ministers would automatically ignore Strasbourg Court's last-minute pyjama injunctions, with few exceptions, when they go overnight and get stuff stopped, effectively. Illegal migrants will be blocked from bringing individual claims to suspend flights in all but an extremely limited set of circumstances. A broader block on courts relying on international treaties to stop claims as well. So, I mean, all sorts of details that they want to strengthen the law as it stands, which is difficult because the right and left of the Conservative Party are pulling Henry in different directions on this, aren't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, there are two problems that Rishi Sunak has with this. One is, as you say, the Parliamentary Conservative Party is divided on whether or not it goes too far or not. The version of the bill we have at the minute was just enough to square the One Nation bloc, which is on the left of the party. The rebels want to toughen it up. But the other problem is the House of Lords, right? Like, it's already almost impossible to imagine that this bill is going to get through the House of Lords as it is. There's not time to use the Parliament Act. Rishi Sunak can't force it through. It's never going to get through with this stuff from the rebels on it. Like, what they're doing effectively is guaranteeing that the Lords will kill this bill.
Because it's effectively blocking an appeal system, really.
Yeah, essentially. And there's no sort of mandate for this kind of policy. You know, if Rishi Sunak had just won an election on something like this, maybe it would be different. But as it is, the House of Lords can quite legitimately kill this bill, which means that in March it will fall on double insistence, and then they won't have a Rwanda bill. So I don't know what the actual political strategy is, but there is no prospect, whatever the merits or demerits of the individual proposals, there's no prospect of it becoming law.
I agree with that.
OK. We'll talk more about that, no doubt, another time. All to play for next week, certainly when it comes back. Next up, though, we'll take a look at the front of the Telegraph, featuring a story surrounding the Scottish Gender Recognition Bill. Back in a moment.
breached the road. There is a lot of gas being fired all around us. शांति से इनको समझाओ वरना ये हम लोग It is an absolute carnival kind of atmosphere out here for Prime Minister Modi's decisive victory. These students are defying the prohibitory orders and now they're going to be arrested. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. The roads have been inundated. The only way out is to get people by boat. What is feared that over 200 people might have died because of these landslides. This on any given day would have been bustling with people, but today it's absolutely deserted. This is one of the most sensitive areas of northeast Delhi where there's been clashes. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Well, let's bring you the very latest. You're watching the press preview, joined by Henry Hill from Conservative Home and Sonia Soda from The Observer. Welcome back to both of you. So let's go to Boeing, shall we, Henry? It's on the front page of the Financial Times. They have said that they are changing their inspection systems, not surprising after what 2 airlines found.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, this all kicked off when part of a plane blew off in midair. Essentially, it was a door plug, which is On some models, on some builds, you would have an emergency exit, but on some you wouldn't, depending on the airline. And so what they did was, where they didn't have an emergency exit, they put in this door plug, and it's secured with bolts. And it turns out that those bolts could use tightening, according to, I think that was the terminology used by the investigator, needed serious tightening. So one of them fell off in midair and ended up in someone's garden. Some kid's shirt was ripped off by the decompression, and a plane had to make an emergency landing. And that wasn't a one-off. They've now grounded all of these planes that were being used by lots of airlines for lots of international flights, and none of them are going to fly again until that enhanced safety recommendation is completed, because apparently several pilots before the incident happened on previous flights had reported that they were getting decompression warnings on their dashboards. So it was something that someone could maybe have seen coming. No one did, and as a result, here we are.
Yeah, and obviously we know what happened to the MAX 8 planes as well, with the loss of over 300 lives. You know, warnings about, in a sense, corporate culture, the push for shareholders to max out, separation of the corporate headquarters from the manufacturing side. You know, lots really about how this company is run. So there are lots of questions for Boeing, not least its share price, which has seen falls in the last 2 days. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph, shall we? Scottish parents face jail if they stop their children changing gender, Sonia.
So this is about new legislation on the table from the Scottish Government to ban two things. The first is gay conversion therapy. There's a lot of consensus. That is a good thing. It's needed. It refers to practices which are well defined around trying to force somebody to change their sexuality. It's incredibly abusive. The bit that's far more controversial is around gender identity, because there's an emerging medical consensus that children who may be experiencing gender dysphoria, that may be a sign they'll have a trans identity in adulthood, but it might also be a sign of plenty of other things, like they're questioning their own same-sex attraction, you know, they're experiencing uncomfortableness around puberty, they don't like their changing body. So there's all sorts of questions around it. And this legislation, in that respect, feels very overbearing, I think, because it potentially criminalises the relationship between parent and child. If a parent believes in the affirmative, in a sort of exploratory model, which is where the medical consensus lies, but the child says, no, we want to change gender, it kind of criminalises that relationship potentially. So it's worrying.
Sonia Soda, Henry Hill, thank you both very much indeed. We'll see you for the 11, of course. Here's the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the next few days do look mostly quiet and cold, with a stiff breeze bringing a significant wind chill to many. So mostly dry and sunny at first tomorrow, with an extensive hard frost in the south and northwest. Central and northeastern parts will be cloudier and milder. There'll be a little patchy rain and hill snow there too. Southern and northwestern parts will stay mostly fine through the morning, while northeastern and central Britain, Northern Ireland and the northeast of Ireland will be cloudy with a few light showers. Wintry on the hills.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.